Hi, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, whichever part of the world you're logging in from. My name is Tina. I'm from Informa, the organizer for this webinar. I would like to warmly welcome everyone to today's webinar on Master Instructional Design Skills by the amazing Carrie Addington. So before we begin today's session, I want to go over a few housekeeping points. So the webinar is scheduled for 30 minutes, and the last 5 minutes will be dedicated for some questions. Carrie would be conducting the Master Instructional Design Skills program as a part of the ADDIE European Summit next month in Brussels. So the conference will be taking place on the 7th and 8th of October, and the Master Instructional Design Skills program will be taking place on the 9th to the 11th of October. Please note that we'll be recording today's webinar, and we will send a link of the recording to all the participants by next week. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Carrie. Carrie is an internal ADDIE senior facilitator and a master trainer. She has been a business consultant and an educator for the last 10 years, and she has experience designing and delivering customized management and self-development programs, including personal coaching on strategy and communication. So without any further delay, over to you, Carrie.
Great. Thank you so much, Tina, for the warm welcome and introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today, this evening, this afternoon, wherever you are in the world. So yes, we are glad to have you with us as we do kind of a skimming of the surface of this very robust topic. We have 30 minutes, and so today's aim is really to have a conversation around this word mastery, which will ask that we really lift up our conversation to the master level, thinking more strategically about today's topics with a lens of really tying all of our design decisions, to the business outcomes of the organization. So at all turns of our design, really thinking, how does this impact the organization? So again, this is me who will be on the other end of the line. I put my email here on the screen. I invite you to take that down. I'll give it to everyone at the end of today's session as well as a resource if you'd like to follow up with deeper questions about this content topic or just have a conversation in general. I am here as a resource, so that email is there and I invite you to take it down and use it. As was mentioned, yes, I've been in instructional design for a little over 10 years and spanning various industries, including healthcare and beauty and nonprofit. And my most recent experience before joining ADDIE was working with Estee Lauder companies. And so doing a lot of design work for their field sales employees and coaching programs. So I'll be talking about some of those examples as we move through today's topics. So let's take a look at our topics. We're just skimming the surface here. It's a very high-level view of just 3 key considerations master instructional designers use to design more outcome-based learning programs. So again, not an exhaustive list here, just 3 key considerations that we'll start with today. In facilitating this course, our Master Instructional Designer program, these are topics that yield the most game-changing differences in terms of how people are designing outcome-based programs. So my colleagues always remark on these 3, which is why we are going to be talking about them today. And at the end of the session, we will be rounding out today's session with a special invitation we have for everyone that's here today. So as we head into these topics, the learning and development landscape really continues to evolve, as we all know, and we're tasked as instructional designers with really maximizing our resources while still delivering quality learning solutions. So today's preview will really set us up for success as we look at how to write performance-based learning objectives that align to business outcomes and the findings from our needs assessment. Also looking at varying our instructional methods to bring along all of our learners, and we will talk about that more richly. And then talking about that right mix. What is the right mix of formal, informal, and social learning? And we'll talk about a few models there for your consideration. So this term mastery, we have a definition here in terms of what is mastery when we think about it from an instructional design perspective. And generally, when we elevate to this level of mastery, we're sound in key knowledge areas such as establishing business outcomes and learning theory and instructional design theory. And we begin starting to get to those levels of deep learning. And what I mean by deep learning is we're not just training our learners what to do, we're training them to know what to do and why they're doing it. So that deep learning really gets to that question of why, so that they have a really rich understanding of why they are doing a certain task in a certain way. So the first topic we'll chat about is writing performance-based objectives to align to TNA findings, TNA standing, of course, for the needs assessment. So when we think about our guidelines for learning objectives, there are various models out there. We're going to talk about one of them in particular today. Noting that there are various models you can use, there are some guidelines we can follow. When writing more performance-based learning objectives, we really want to ensure that they're consistent with the requirements of the job and ensuring that they're specific, observable, and measurable. So key here, consistent with job requirements and that they're specific, observable, and measurable. What I love about this first bullet that you see here is that we are really looking at tied to the business outcomes, not to the activities. What does that mean? If I am building a role play activity for a sales team, I want to think about what the business outcome of that role play is. So if I'm teaching them how to sell in a new product, for instance, in that role play, I want that role play to closely simulate what's going to happen back on the job and think about what is the business need that this is meeting. Well, it's increasing customer satisfaction for my organization because customer satisfaction rates were lower this year. So year to year, we need to start increasing those rates. Therefore, we will build an activity that then ties to that business outcome. So again, this helps us get clear about what our learning objectives are setting us up for. One key guideline that we have is that notion of the language that we want to use. The word understand appears in so many learning objectives. Many of them I've written myself and then had to edit out. The word understand, along with the words know and learn, are not aligning to that third bullet of being very specific, being very observable, and being very measurable. I cannot prove that someone understands something, but if I have them match information to scenarios, then I can track and observe and measure that they were able to do that matching. So we're going to look at a model that can help us really reach all of these best practices and guidelines. And that model is the Mager model. The Mager model, some of you might be familiar with this model. Again, not the only model to be used, but the Mager model is quite beneficial if you're looking to get extremely specific on performance-based learning objectives. So again, here are all the benefits of the Mager model that you see listed here. It allows you to be quite strategic about heading into designing each of your lessons or each of your modules within a certain program. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at an example of a learning objective for a specific lesson within a 3-day program. And I want to walk you through what you see here. The Mager model consists of 3 key parts. That's the performance condition statement. And the performance condition statement is just saying, here's what we're going to give the learner to be successful. So what materials will we create or provide for them in order for them to then perform what we see next, which is that action statement. And this is where we get into the behavior. What will the learner be able to do at the end of this lesson? And that leads us to our performance criterion statement, our third and final portion of this model, which is really thinking, how am I going to measure it? So let's look through this example together. When we look at this Mager model example, it starts with given a choice of 5 different classes of fires. So I could get even more specific if I preferred and say given a table that lists the 5 different classes of fires. That tells me as a designer I need to design materials that list the 5 different classes of fires in order for my learner to be successful. So it's all the materials they need. That middle model with the action statement, that's where we're going to see participants will be able to identify the correct fire extinguisher to use. So that's really at the end of the day what they need to do. They need to identify the correct fire extinguisher to use. How well or how often do they need to do that? That's where we look to that performance criterion statement. Accurately in 4 out of 5 scenarios. So if they only identify the correct fire extinguisher to use in 2 of the 5 scenarios, I know they did not meet that objective and the business outcomes therefore cannot be met. So this is a great model to get extremely specific, and what I personally prefer about this model as an instructional designer is that it sets me up for success as well. It sets the learner up for success in terms of what they can achieve, and it tells me exactly what I need to design to be successful, for them to be successful, and how I'm going to prove or measure that they were successful. Make sure that I don't overlook those key points. Now I might be looking at, when I think about looking at learning objectives and performance-based learning objectives, like the example we see on the screen, I lift it to that mastery level by then attaching this question at the end of this learning objective and asking that bigger picture question of, so what? And what I mean by that is, great that my learners will be given a choice of 5 different classes of fires. They'll identify the correct fire extinguisher to use accurately in 4 out of 5 scenarios. Achieved, the training event was successful. So with that, excuse me for that little interloper of a security reboot on my screen in the middle of our WebEx. But that'll come off your screen momentarily. But as we work through this, when we think about lifting to that mastery level, we're really asking that question of so what? So now that they've done this learning objective, what does that mean to the bigger picture? Why does the organization want the learner to identify the correct fire extinguisher to use? Maybe it's because they need to align to safety regulations. So thinking about what the business outcome is, we ask that question at the end of the learning objective, so what? That'll get us to tie back to that big picture for the organization. So speaking of, let's look at that next. As we look at business outcomes, an effective instructional design really begins with understanding business goals and objectives of the organization. We all know this. This is why we do very thorough needs assessment findings and reports. This helps us understand the current state of the business. So the future goals of the business, what the learner needs to learn in order to contribute to those goals. And the key here is that outcomes really equal results. And most key stakeholders in our organizations are most interested in results. So learning objectives, they're critical for good design. They scope a learning solution, but they generally don't build buy-in and acceptance unless they are aligned to clear outcomes. So when we get to that level of mastery with instructional design, we really want to start aligning each objective in our program to that bigger picture of what is the outcome we're seeking. If you are ever designing a program where you sense a lack of acceptance or you need to get all key stakeholders on board, there's a real need to lead with business outcomes. Let's look at some examples here. The example we see on the screen now as a business outcome, reinforce financial and technical competencies. So with that, it's an okay outcome, but really it's just a statement. If we wanted to make it a true business outcome, we might attach that question of so what? Why are we reinforcing financial and technical competencies? We're doing it to decrease regulatory penalties in Q1. That's why it matters to the bottom line and the business and the key stakeholders. So again, that question of so what can be very powerful with our learning objectives, but also as we transition to thinking bigger picture to the business outcomes. So once we have those sound learning objectives that are measurable, they're written to align to those business outcomes, we're safe to move into our second topic of instructional methods. Varying our instructional methods, this program really gets specific about how to design to support that deep learning of teaching our learners what to do and why they're doing it. And a way to really bring about all of our learners is by varying those instructional methods. We've identified the learner needs during our needs assessment process when we did our performer analysis. So we know that learners have different learning styles. They have different learning preferences, even different motivating principles, different generational factors. There are a lot of preferences and styles that can say, well, not all learners are really going to like a simulation, and not all learners are going to like a large group discussion or a case study example. So keeping that in mind, as master instructional designers, we vary our instructional methods throughout our programs for that very reason. It reaches all learners. So I get the question a lot in a lot of our design programs at ATD of how do I really design with the kinesthetic learner in mind? And how do I design with an auditory learner in mind? And our perspective is really you design for all of them and you vary your instructional methods and you will bring them all along. Our expectation is not to design a behavior modeling exercise and expect that every single learner in the room will really capture what that is trying to convey. They will get the information. It may not be their favorite activity or exercise of the day. They may prefer later when they get to do a game-based or structured experience within the learning program. The key is we don't cater to one learning style, preference, generation, or motivating principle in a learner. We instead vary our instructional methods and we will reach them all. Right? So this course really dives deeper into principles to support that deep learning we're talking about, as well as different learning theories and learner motivations. So are they motivated by inclusion or competence? And how do we vary the instructional methods to bring all of those motivating factors along? So in a one-day course, for instance, we would want to include 1 to 2 instructional methods. At least, I would argue we could probably vary every activity to have a different instructional method experience. If we vary our methods from some of the options you see here on the screen, again, to make a point, this is not an exhaustive list, of course. This is just some options to choose from in terms of instructional methods. We want to think of how do we go about choosing the best instructional method for our learners. And there are a few factors that we can consider when we think of which instructional method we might want to build into our designs. There's 3 key factors here. First, are we addressing the KSRA? Are we addressing a knowledge, a skill, or an attitude? Because that will definitely play into our instructional methods. A great example of that, if I am going back to my previous example of that sales training and we're doing a role play, is the learning objective addressing skill and attitude, and does it need to? Or is it just addressing skill? Or did I only get to a knowledge? Did I get them to watch a skill practice, but they didn't get to actually role play and participate in it themselves? So thinking of what domain of learning are we addressing? The knowledge, the skill, or the attitude? And I, of course, here I'm referring to Bloom's domains of learning. Our second factor, who are the learners? So what did we learn from our needs assessment and our performer analysis that's going to inform the decisions we make in terms of our instructional methods? What's the group size? What's the experience level? What are the distinct characteristics of the learners in the room for this particular training event? A great example of this, group size. If I have a 3-day program and one of my instructional methods is a jigsaw learning or team teach back, if I only have 8 participants in my room that day for a face-to-face training, a teach back is not going to be as effective because the groups are going to be so small. If I have a group of 30, I can really do a jigsaw team teach back instructional method and see the dynamics of it. They will have to have a conversation together. They will learn from one another in those conversations and come back and teach that to the larger group. So more effective is an instructional method with a larger size. Could be done with a smaller size, but these are the considerations that we would think about as we think about designing for who those specific learners are. And of course, the final factor, what are the practical requirements? So what time is allotted for this training? What is the physical environment that we will be in? Is it a virtual synchronous environment? Is it an asynchronous self-paced e-learning module, or is it instructor-led? It's really thinking about those requirements, as well as what materials will I have available for them? Limitations, everything from budget and time and resources and alignment, all the things that are practical requirements, but also what might be standing in the way. Moving through these 3 key factors will help as you think about which of these instructional methods do I want to use, keeping in mind we want to vary our instructional methods throughout our program. And our final content topic today is really thinking about getting to that nice mix of workplace learning. So as instructional designers, we know how difficult it is for learners to actually apply new knowledge and skills they've learned in a training event to improve their actual job performance. That job transfer is a key topic, especially at this mastery level. And one way we can design for this result is really to consider what happens before and after a training event. So not just what happens when they're in that formal environment, but what we can do to set them up for success before and after that training to help weave that into their everyday job performance. One model we're going to look at that you see here on the screen is Dan Pontefract's 33-33-33 concept, and it really approximates how workplace learning currently takes place. So just to break this down a little more, and then we can talk about another perspective as well. The formal, you see it's an even distribution between the 3 pockets here, and the formal is really anything that's a structured learning experience. Could be virtual, could be an e-learning, could be game-based or performance review. So great for this formal category is really great for large numbers of learners. It includes a variety of learning methods, as we just discussed, to appeal to all learners. And it's what's happening within the confines of the training event. That informal category is really anything you might consider unscheduled or impromptu. This could be mentoring and coaching if it is unscheduled and impromptu. This could be shadowing. It might not be a specific part of someone's performance review, but it might be that, hey, I'm in town with a field sales representative in a certain region, so I'm going to ride along and shadow them for the day and give them informal feedback. Another great example of informal is podcasts and webcasts. So these feel like a more natural way to learn for the learner. They can occur in the workplace at any time, highly relevant, can be more personalized or customized. So another tangible example of informal learning is in my experience in designing for field sales employees at Estee Lauder companies. When we rolled out a new coaching program, one of the vital components was a podcast series. And that was really what we were doing from an informal learning design perspective that could be used after the training event had occurred to supplement and support success for our field sales employees. And what that looked like was every week we would roll out a new topic on a 8-minute or less podcast, 8 minutes or less, because we were looking for micro and bite-sized learning. In that podcast, it would give them one core topic of focus that they were to focus on in their conversations with their clients for that entire week. It'd talk about the topic, it would give them some high key points, and then they would hear a 4 to 5 minute role play scenario of a conversation so that they could experience behavioral modeling in that podcast to hear what the good conversation sounded like, and then they would go have that conversation. It fits in this informal category because one, it's after to support the training, and two, because we weren't tracking necessarily. We tracked how many people listened to the podcast, but we couldn't necessarily get very specific with tracking what they actually implemented from that in the conversation, unless we also had more of a social aspect to that workplace learning and brought in a shadowing or a ride along. So just a way to think about that informal learning. If we were tracking it more specifically, it might move out of that informal category. And last but not least, you have your social category here, both informal and formal. This enables the transfer of knowledge or skills when individuals learn from one another. So this can be everything from microblogging to user-generated content and videos, any discussion threads, any Yammer or Skype channels that are out there, Slack channels that are really allowing people to share resources, share information, collaborate, and build an offline conversation that contributes to their success on the job. It really also is effective, that social element, in a constantly changing environment. So any organization or department where there's a lot of change consistently happening, it can help to build relationships. It can also help build faster access to new information, new trends. So now that we've worked through those three pieces, we're really looking at workplace learning. Again, this is Dan Pontefract's 33-33-33 concept. Just one to consider. There are many theories out there. Another widely known is the Center for Creative Leadership, the CCL, and their 70-20-10 model, which is really leveraging a lot of informal and social learning, leaving only 10% to that formal learning environment. So again, these theories all come into consideration as we think about designing at that mastery level. And the benefit here, this mix of workplace learning really allows us to reach all learners and directly tie to those business outcomes I've been expressing as we move through the program. Some deeper discussions that we have as master instructional designers are concepts like I mentioned earlier, deep and shallow learning, how to incorporate principles of interactive learning and accelerated learning. So based on our very high level discussion, it was just a skimming of the surface really. You might be wondering, what are your next steps if you would like to take them? Perhaps you'll begin by revising or writing learning objectives using that Mager model. Maybe you've never used it and you'd like to start using that Mager model. Maybe you'll start rethinking out how each learning objective in your design is aligning to that larger business outcome by asking that so what question. And another option for a next step is a special offer that we have for you. As was mentioned by Tina in the beginning of the session, we do have the Master Instructional Design Program coming to Brussels in October. I'm excited to be there with you. And this just gives you a deep dive into all the learning takeaways, as well as what I love about this program is that it's a three-part experience. There's a before session, a live session in Brussels, and you're really working on a real world project that gets evaluated to establish that you've really elevated that design. And I would love to be on that journey with you. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Tina, who will give you your special offer.
Thank you so much for that, Carrie. It was a great session. So we have a special discount for all the webinar attendees, which gives you 300 euros discount instantly to be a part of the ADDIE European Summit in Brussels next month on the 7th and 8th of October, and also a chance to join the Master Instructional Design Skills program from the 9th to the 11th October. So Don't forget to use this promo code. It's webinar 300, and this is exclusive to all the webinar attendees. So this you can join us at the event next month in Brussels. Also, I think I have a few questions coming in.
Great.
I can see two. So I can see a question from Subay who asked, is experience classified as a tangible or an intangible knowledge?
Is experience classified as tangible or intangible knowledge? I wish I could ask more questions to this attendee. My understanding of how I'm interpreting that is, I would say experience, we'd get more specific with the word experience.
Right.
And I think they mean it in terms of learning objectives, in which if I'm writing a learning objective and I use that language, I might want to use Bloom's taxonomy of learning, get really specific with that higher level of learning and think of what am I wanting them to exhibit. If that's what is meant by that question, that would be my answer. I'm not entirely sure about that context.
Yeah. There's one more question. I think it's
Okay.
very specific, a regional specific question because it says in KSA.
Ah,
So in Saudi Arabia, how
yeah.
can attitude be addressed? So I think it's a very regional question.
Yeah, well, but it's a great question because it's
Yeah.
a lot of people are asking attitude, and I want to change some language there to that question. So we
Yeah.
say attitude according to Bloom's domains, but when we think about it in an HR context, we really change it to ability. So it's thinking of, we're not training towards someone's attitude or ability. We're training towards, I want to influence their ability to have the knowledge, use the knowledge, and demonstrate a potential skill. So sometimes, and that might be how the question is being phrased, is yes, in the HR realm, the language shifts more to ability. So it's thinking, do they have the prerequisites? Do they have the baseline knowledge? Have I succeeded in giving them new hire orientation that sets them up for success? Have I given them everything that they are able to move into this, and have I given them enough support? So thinking of it from that language of ability helps a lot. Attitude feels a little less HRE in that way.
Okay, I have one more question that says, is there a risk that without due care and attention, there is a risk of instructional alignment rather than constructive?
Can you read that one for me again, Tina?
Yeah, is there a risk that without due care and attention, there is a risk of instructional alignment there rather than constructive?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. I mean, we definitely, and that's kind of what we talk about in this program, is thinking of how to design very intentionally, very strategically, so that we can gain alignment to business outcomes. Yeah. I wish I could get back and forth on these conversations so that we could clarify these questions. One thing I will offer, and I've just put into chat to the entire audience, if you see that chat listing on your dashboard, go ahead and click on that caret to the left of it, and it will open it up, and you'll see there my email again. I invite you to, if I wasn't able to answer your question specifically, I'd love to have that conversation where we can engage a little deeper. So my email is there, and if your question wasn't answered in our time together today, of course, I can meet you on email as well.
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, there's one more question, I think two questions which ask the same thing. So this is related to the workplace pie chart that you showed.
Yes.
The question is, what's the course of the learning at the workplace pie? So I don't know exactly what that means, but
Can you say that
the
again, Tina?
course. What's the course of the learning at the workplace pie chart? Is there a course for that particular pie chart?
Like basically, yeah. So essentially, Dan Pontefract came up with it, and it was really thinking about how the learning ratios, and his whole theory, it's just his theory on workplace learning and how we might want to divide it. And he's just saying that he sees an even distribution amongst all three in order to set learners up for success, because it's really thinking about that transfer of learning, right? So it's saying if we have a before, a during, and an after to our training. So what are we doing to set them up informally or socially before the training? Formally, we come together during the training. And then what are we doing informally or socially after the training to set them up for success? That will have more workplace transfer, so that they will actually, what they learn in that context of that training event and the formal aspect will then be supplemented back on the job. So he's just taking the approach of, if we evenly distribute it, we have that before, during, and after, we can gain alignment from frontline managers, from key stakeholders, and set all of our learners up for success.
Okay. Is that all the time we have, or do you want to take more questions?
We can take one more.
Okay, so how is instructional design skills supporting KMS implementation?
Can we say that again?
How is instructional design skills support KMS implementation?
That's a great question. I'd actually invite whoever wrote that question to engage on email with me. And the reason why, because there's a lot of questions I have to answer that appropriately.
Okay, that will be Mr. Subay. So
okay, please, yes, email caddington@td.org. I'd love to get into that conversation.
Awesome. So I think that's all we have the time for today. And if you have any more questions, please feel free to email Carrie with any questions that you have, and she can get back to you on that. Just to wrap up, Carrie would be conducting the Master Instructional Design Skills Program as a part of the ADDIE European Summit next month in Brussels. So the conference is on the 7th and the 8th of October, and the Master Instructional Design Skill Program is from the 9th to the 11th October. Also, please note that we would be recording this session today, and we'll be sending a link of the recording to all the participants by next week. So thank you so much, Carrie, for this detailed information about the Master Instructional Design Skills Program. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you have a wonderful day ahead.
Great, thank you.